Well, thank you for being here today for our press conference on what I describe as the most important issue that's getting the least amount of attention relative to its importance in our country. And like many other issues, we're going to be deciding on November 5 what kind of a country we're going to be, and it applies to this issue as well. President Trump had withdrawn the U.S. from the WHO, and of course the Biden administration, like every other disastrous decision they made, reversed those policies when the Biden-Harris administration got in charge. Well, later this week, the UN is going to hold a, quote, summit for the future. And they're going to produce, this is right from their website, an intergovernmentally negotiated, action-oriented pact for the future with a chapter on transforming global governance. Ascending beyond the powers being sought by its subordinate agency, the WHO, the UN is seeking even broader and more powerful authority, as you will hear a lot about today. The Biden-Harris administration apparently intends to fully support the surrender and compliance of the U.S. to the UN in these endeavors. They are aligned with the international globalists that hate America, that hate the Constitution, that hate our founders, that hate our founding Judeo-Christian principles, and they want America to become like the rest of the world. They don't want us to be subordinate to or governed by our Constitution. No, they want America to be subordinate to and governed by the UN, the World Health Assembly, and the WHO. And in fact, they intend to join with others at the UN summit this week to vote to award additional powers to the UN Secretary General. They seek to facilitate the evolution of the UN from an international cooperative body to an international governing body. These powers would be triggered by any one of a number of so-called global emergencies, whether it was a so-called climate emergency, a health emergency, a cyber emergency, or a gun violence emergency, whatever that's supposed to be, a financial emergency, or whatever they deem appropriate. And the Biden-Harris administration is in full agreement with the UN and the WHO on efforts to place us under their authority and to require such things as their international health regulations, including the surveillance of U.S. citizens, the censoring of dissenting views, and much more. The American people didn't vote for this, and they don't support this, and it's up to the people's representatives, that's us gathered here today, to have a responsibility to expose this and to reject this. The U.S. should defund the WHO again. We should withdraw from the WHO. Any agreements with the WHO or the UN should require Senate approval or disapproval. And a bipartisan House majority voted to require Senate approval just last week with Tom Tiffany's bill on the House floor. So I'm proud to be joined here by my House colleagues and others who are appropriately concerned and educated, informed, and leading on this issue. Again, this is the most important issue that's getting the least amount of attention relative to its importance and its impact on our country and on the American people. And with that, I yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Ralph Norman.
Thank you, Congressman Good. I want to thank Frank Gaffney, Tony Perkins, all my colleagues for taking a lead role in this. As Congressman Good said, this is probably, other than our financial crisis this country's in, the most important issue to call attention to. The Summit of the Future will happen on September 22nd, 23rd. And folks, what that will do is cede America's authority, America's sovereignty to basically China. China is defined as a developing country. It is the number 2 economy behind America. It's not developing. It will cede our decision-making ability to China. That's what you need to know. Let me read out what the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, his policy brief 2, issued on March of 2023. I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of a future complex global shock of sufficient scale. Guess who determines that? The World Health Organization. It reveals in their definition a possible global shock, including large-scale climate or environmental events, determined by who? The Secretary General. Future pandemics. We all endured what the problem we had with the latest virus. High-impact events involving a biological agent, determined by who? The World Health Organization. Disruption of global flows of goods, determined by who? Not America, but the WHO under the Secretary General. Not only that, it requires a 5% payment by the United States every year of our total medical dollars spent, which are in the trillions. Bottom line, we cannot let this go. This is a top-line issue that America must be made aware of. It's got to go through the Senate where it requires 60 votes. And we're going to fight to make sure all Americans know what's happening and stop it dead in its tracks. The WHO needs to be defunded, we need to do away with it, and America get out of it. I now call on Frank Gaffney with the Sovereignty Coalition.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you to all of those present. I wanted to most especially thank those who voted last week for H.R. 1425, which did exactly what Congressman Norman just talked about. Requires the United States Senate to advise and, I hope, dissent on the kind of surrender of our sovereignty to global government that is envisioned both with respect to the World Health Organization and with respect now to the UN. That's, make no mistake about it, the agenda of the UN Summit of the Future. That is unmistakably what they hope to put in train with their so-called Pact of the Future. And the thing that is absolutely infuriating about all of this is not only, as these gentlemen have said, this is really important. And most people in the media, most people in government, certainly the vast majority of Americans have no idea this is even going on, let alone reading in the rest of us. So it seems to me that what is needed now is not only to have the Senate charged, as with the World Health Organization's International Health Regulation Treaty, also the Pact for the Future. There must be no application of whatever they come up with in terms of world government by the UN Secretary General without the Senate's advice and consent. And secondly, I call here today on former President Donald Trump to use his platforms to address and draw out his opponent, the Vice President of the United States, on whether or not she supports world government. And if she doesn't, for her to disavow what the Biden administration is doing right now to try to bring it about. Thank you very much. Next up is Andy Biggs.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks to Bob and Ralph for organizing this and for all who are standing with us, my colleagues and those who are concerned about this. You know, this administration has attacked United States sovereignty since day one. They've done it by attacking our geographical integrity, and now they want to cede our sovereignty over to the United Nations, and in particular the World Health Organization. It's important to understand that how critical it is that we let the American people know how dangerous this administration is and their policies are. So, when we think about it, $850 million, that's our annual assessment today to the World Health Organization. But we consistently pay more than our assessment. Why is that? Because this administration wants to pay more. And we're the folks at the United Nations working hand in glove with the World Health Organization to have their way, we would be spending even more. And we'd be spending more to become enslaved to them because of the things that my previous speakers, my co-speakers have said. I introduced legislation, H.R. 2022, which gets us out of the World Health Organization and defunds our portion of it. Why is that? It's because the World Health Organization has become captured. It's been captured by our international adversary, China. We saw that as a result of the COVID-19 issue and how the World Health Organization protected Xi Jinping and the Chinese. We can't give up any more of our sovereignty, any more of our geographical integrity, any more of our economic integrity to foreign actors who have no concern about the United States of America other than to take our power and our money away. This administration is all in for it. That should be enough to tell everyone that this is a non-starter. I appreciate my colleagues for helping raise this today. I appreciate you and the media being here today, because this will be an ongoing effort. An ongoing effort as the out-of-control spending that Congress is engaged in, coupled with the border problems that we have. Let's at least not turn over our healthcare apparatus to folks from a United Nations or an international multilateral institution that has no concern for us. So I thank you for being here, and now I yield to the gentlelady from Wyoming, my friend Harriet Hageman.
Thank you. In my home state of Wyoming, we have common sense, something that seems to be sorely lacking in the Biden-Harris administration. Wyomingites that I have spoken with consistently ask why this administration would push to fund any organization that has clearly come under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. They wonder why Biden and Harris would try to enter into unconstitutional agreements with foreign entities that would force Americans to give up their sovereignty. It is worth noting that the bulk of the WHO's budget comes from voluntary contributions from multiple countries and organizations. Throughout the past decade, the United States has donated billions of taxpayer dollars, making us the WHO's largest financial contributor. Over this time, the CCP has exerted an expanded influence and corrupted the organization's data, research, and information sharing. Despite its abject failure, the organization is seeking greater control and greater funding while continuing to block legitimate investigations into the origins of COVID-19. On June 1st, the accord that amended the international health regulations was adopted by the World Health Assembly. While there are many concerning aspects of this accord, with its ceding of our sovereignty being at the top of the list, it obligates member states to address misinformation and disinformation. The result would be something that we have become all too familiar with under this administration: mandating, censoring, and sanctioning of speech and other actions that are at odds with the WHO Director General's deliberations. Of course, this is a clear violation of our constitutional rights, but Biden and Harris have never cared much for those. I have co-sponsored legislation introduced by Congressman Chip Roy, the No Taxpayer Funding for the World Health Organization Act, which would prohibit the U.S. from making any assessed or voluntary contributions to the WHO. International law does not trump the Constitution. Biden and Harris may be compromised by the CCP, but they cannot force Americans to follow laws and regulations not passed by our own federal government. Thank you, and with that, I cede to Ronnie Jackson.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to start by saying, as a physician who's followed the WHO for many years now, in my time in government, during 3 presidential administrations, and now as my time as a member of Congress, I can tell you that the WHO in particular and the UN in general do not represent what's best for this country. In fact, they do everything they can to undermine us and defeat us. Look at what happened during COVID as a perfect example. During COVID, they lied to us, and they worked with China to cover up the origins of COVID. You have to ask yourself, do you really want, next time this happens, for the WHO to decide how taxpayer dollars in this country are spent, to decide what resources we are and are not eligible for, despite the fact that we overwhelmingly fund their operations? That's what you're going to get. And as my colleague, Mr. Good, pointed out, they can define an emergency in any way they want. And believe me, it will be creative, and it won't be a healthcare crisis again next time. It'll be something related to the climate or gun control or some other woke agenda that they have on their radar. This IHR treaty is nothing more than a redistribution of wealth and government control via global governance. This fits right into the communist and socialist ideology that defines today's Democrat Party in this country. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and their administration would like nothing more than to pass their responsibility to protect this country's health and livelihood to another country, many of which do not appreciate the United States, do not like the United States, and many of which are hostile to the United States. They would love nothing more than to pass this responsibility to these countries. I am a firm believer that from this point forward, we should never give another penny to the World Health Organization. They have not represented us well. They never have, and they never will. They are not an ally to this country. They are not an asset to this country. We should not be paying hard-earned taxpayer dollars for their efforts that are oftentimes against us. With regards to the United Nations, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I think the best thing we could do for the United Nations is to go to New York and push the entire thing off into the East River. And with that, I turn it over to Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. Well, we're here today to rain on the WHO's parade as they march for power. I think the WHO, we were here about 6 months ago, similar press conference prior to their June meeting in Geneva, where they tried to gain international support for their pandemic accord, which they did not do. And I'm becoming convinced that the WHO thinks that the rest of us have brain fog from COVID, and they're just going to keep trying this over and over again. But the facts do not change. This is a global power grab. And when you look at the various aspects that this would touch, in particular that have been touched on, that are very concerning, is their focus on so-called disinformation. What we recently saw in Brazil with X is a prime example of what governments would be doing, being empowered by the WHO's pandemic accord, calling on governments to silence and censor dissenting voices. You know, in America, we cherish the First Amendment. We cherish our freedom, and we cherish our families. Both are endangered under this pandemic accord. And I echo the calls here today, number one, to defund the WHO and get the United States out of it. But secondly, any agreement that is advanced by this administration, signed on to, should be submitted to the Senate for ratification and be treated as it is, as a treaty. So I thank these members of Congress for continuing to bring attention to this. While many ignore it, the WHO continues their march for power, and they will not stop. And it's going to be incumbent upon this Congress, this institution, stopping and protecting the American public from the WHO. And with that, I turn it over, is Chip here? Reggie Littlejohn.
Reggie Littlejohn, co-founder of Sovereignty Coalition and president of Anti-Globalist International. Thank you to Representatives Bob Good and Ralph Norman and my other colleagues here, including my co-chair, Frank Gaffney, for organizing this press conference. 1425 was an outstanding victory, which can prevent the depredations of the World Health Organization from moving forward without Senate consent, but we need an equally strong measure in respect to the United Nations. The United Nations Pact for the Future is going to be the deliverable at the Summit for the Future, which is this weekend, and nobody knows about it. So in the Summit for the Future, they are going to approve a platform, an emergency platform that will operationalize automatically in the case of a complex global shock. What does it mean to operationalize automatically? It means that once they have passed it through the United Nations, they don't have to ask other countries to approve it. They will just go forward with their protocols. And how did they approve this? It's being adopted by something called the silence procedure. The silence procedure, this is a pact. A pact is a form of treaty. It's supposed to go through the ratification process internationally. Instead, they're doing it where they submit a draft, and if nobody objects to it, then it's adopted. Adopted. And then it's noted that it was adopted at the actual Summit for the Future. So this is absolutely unconstitutional. Not only that, it's against the Charter of the United Nations. They are trying to expand their powers. They're doing an end run around their own charter through the silence procedure. We need to raise the alarm about this, and we need to stop it. Thank you. Next one is Representative Eli Crane.
All right, thank you guys for coming out today to cover this. I want to say thank you to Congressman Good, Norman for hosting this, and my other colleagues for showing up. Obviously, this is a complete disaster. I'm not surprised at all that this administration is supporting it. They've completely betrayed us on our southern border, and it looks like they're attempting to sell out our sovereignty once again with this agreement. I just want to read what my colleague Congressman Norman read. This is from Gutierrez. I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of future complex global shock of sufficient scale, severity, and reach. The key word there is authority. That's what these globalists want. They want authority. They want to strip it away from what we have here and the representatives that we have here that represent the people of this country, though none of them were elected by anyone in this country. And what do they want authority over? Because it's not just the next pandemic. All right, large-scale climate or environmental events. Wow, they could be real creative with that one. Future pandemics, high-impact events involving a biological agent, disruptions to global flows of goods, people, or finance, disruptive activity in cyberspace or disruption to global digital connectivity, major event in outer space, or black swan events. That's enough examples and enough reasons for them to get involved pretty much whenever and wherever they want to. And I hope that this body and the Senate continues to reject, push back, and stop this agreement and this push by this administration to sell out our sovereignty to globalists. Thank you. Next up is Chris Ullman, Eagle Forum.
Thank you so much. I'm Chris Ullman, the president of Eagle Forum. I'm delighted to be here. We're a grassroots organization of patriots who love this Constitution. Today is September 17th. Today is Constitution Day, the day when all Americans should study the Constitution and learn about it. And I am so grateful for this opportunity to have this press conference today when we're talking about the WHO and the UN and what they're trying to do to take our sovereignty away. And I'm grateful for these members of Congress who are standing up to do their constitutional duty, to be the legislative branch, to decide what our laws are and what laws the American people will live under. The United Nations and the WHO want to become the lawmaking body to tell us what to do. And these members of Congress last week took a step to say, no, it's our job to make the laws, not the UN and not the WHO. The Senate, there are 49 senators who have signed on to a companion bill that requires the same constitutional advice and consent. We have 26 governors who have also spoken out on this, as well as attorneys general. So we're delighted on Constitution Day that this body is taking the first step to get us back to constitutional order. Thank you very much, and now I turn it over to Representatives Norman and Good for questions.
Harry, two questions. Anybody? Yes, sir.
What effect do you think this will have on future elections? Well, I'd say what it has on future elections is bigger than that. It's what it has on the future of this country. I mean, this is a dictatorship. This is, this administration, by its actions when it first took office, had executive orders that were supposed to be temporary during the term of his office, like the border. It's, to reverse that, to walk that back, is going to take a massive effort. This will take the same massive effort. If he votes this in, does not take it to the Senate, we'll cede our sovereignty. We cannot do it. The American people do not want that. That's not what a democracy is all about, and particularly with China. China is our enemy, and to cede it to basically to them is unacceptable, particularly with the COVID virus.
I'll just add to what Congressman Norman said, that you saw the Biden-Harris administration on full display during the China virus situation, where they doubled down and took every recommendation from the WHO. We had to force them, literally, the Republican House had to force them to finally end the pandemic emergency and the so-called mitigation requirements that were in place. So hopefully the American people learn from that. They've suffered sufficiently, and they're going to make change on November 5. One more. All right.
One thing to that last point. When you talk about elections, the founders had a very important insight. You want people voting who are informed. We are here to talk to you and through you to the American people to ensure they are informed, because the process that we're talking about could functionally end the whole idea of limited, accountable, and representative governance of this country under our Constitution. That must not be allowed to happen. And I thank these gentlemen and their colleagues for trying to prevent it from happening.
Thank you all.
Thank y'all so much.
All right, let's cut the crap and get straight to the point. What happens when disaster strikes and FEMA comes knocking on your door? Here's the deal. FEMA agents have the authority to demand entry into your home and inspect your food, water, and other supplies. They don't give a damn about your well-being. They just want to take what you've prepared for yourself and your family. Now, the big question is, how do you protect your stockpile from these agents? You need to know your rights and be prepared to stand your ground. Forget the niceties, this is about survival. When FEMA comes calling, you need to be ready to defend what you've worked hard to put aside for a crisis. It's important to understand that FEMA's actions during emergencies can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, they are tasked with providing essential aid and resources to those affected by disasters. However, their heavy-handed approach and perceived disregard for individual rights have led many to view them with suspicion and distrust. This is where knowing your rights becomes crucial. While FEMA agents may have the authority to inspect your home, they cannot simply barge in without your consent. You have the right to refuse entry unless they have a valid warrant or exigent circumstances that justify immediate action. Stand your ground, but do so firmly and respectfully, as confrontation with government officials can have serious consequences. It's also important to consider the broader context of FEMA's role and the reasons for its creation. FEMA was established in 1979 by President Carter to centralize the government's approach to emergencies, as the previous system of over 100 different agencies dealing with disasters was a disorganized mess. The goal was to streamline disaster response and ensure a more coordinated and effective effort. However, over the years, FEMA has faced its fair share of criticism and controversies. From the slow and ineffective response to Hurricane Katrina to the ongoing concerns about the agency's handling of emergency supplies and resources, FEMA's reputation has taken a hit. This has only fueled the suspicion and mistrust that many Americans have towards the agency. Ultimately, this is a serious situation that requires careful consideration and preparation. No sugarcoating, no beating around the bush. When disaster strikes and FEMA comes calling, you need to be ready to defend your rights and protect what you've worked hard to put aside for a crisis. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and be prepared to stand your ground, but always with a level head and a respect for the law. When disaster strikes, the public often looks to the government's emergency response agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to manage the chaos and aid in the recovery process. The idea behind FEMA's creation was to make disaster response more effective and coordinated. By having a single agency in charge of coordinating the various federal, state, and local resources needed to respond to crises. However, the reality of FEMA's performance during disasters is often quite different from what you might expect from the government's designated emergency response organization. Numerous reports have documented FEMA's failures and inadequacies in the face of major disasters, such as its much-criticized response to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. In the aftermath of a catastrophic event, the situation can quickly turn dire. Emergency services become overwhelmed, and suddenly, a FEMA representative accompanied by law enforcement shows up at your door. Instead of offering the much-needed assistance, they demand to enter your home and inspect your stockpile of food, water, and other essential supplies. This unexpected and heavy-handed approach by FEMA representatives feels like an invasion of your privacy and personal rights. You're left wondering why the very organization tasked with providing aid and support to disaster-stricken communities is now seeking to take away your own personal resources, which you may have painstakingly accumulated in preparation for such an emergency. The reason for this unexpected turn of events is the declaration of martial law by the government. Martial law is a drastic measure that grants the government extraordinary powers during times of crisis, often at the expense of individual rights and freedoms. When martial law is enacted, the military steps in to restore order and ensure public safety, even if it means overriding the regular laws and civil liberties that citizens are accustomed to. This means that your familiar rights and freedoms, such as the right to privacy, the right to free movement, and the right to own and use your own property, can vanish in an instant. The government, through the military, now has the authority to dictate how you live your life, where you can go, and what resources you are allowed to possess, all in the name of preserving public order and security. The implementation of martial law during a disaster can be a deeply unsettling and disorienting experience for the affected population. as they find themselves suddenly thrust into a situation where the normal rules and protections they once took for granted no longer apply. This can further exacerbate the already chaotic and stressful conditions caused by the disaster itself, leaving individuals feeling powerless and uncertain about their future. When martial law is declared, the government is granted sweeping powers that override the usual rights and protections of the citizens. This sudden and dramatic shift in the balance of power can have far-reaching consequences for the everyday lives of the people. Under martial law, the government can enter private property without any legal barriers and confiscate whatever resources they deem essential for the emergency response. This includes seizing food, water, medical supplies, and even personal belongings, all in the name of restoring stability and order. This effectively resets the foundations of society, stripping away the fundamental rights and freedoms that individuals have come to expect, such as the freedom of speech, the right to privacy, and the sanctity of private property. The primary objective of the government during a martial law scenario is to exert tight, centralized control over the entire population. They will restrict the movements of citizens, dictating where and when they are allowed to go, and may even impose travel bans in certain areas. The flow of information will also be tightly regulated, with the government censoring speech, media, and any form of dissent or propaganda that could potentially disrupt the calm facade they are trying to maintain. Furthermore, the government may attempt to disarm the public during these crises, confiscating firearms from lawful owners. This is a controversial move that sparks debates around individual rights and public safety. The government may also seek to control access to essential supplies like food, water, and medication, making the population dependent on the state and further solidifying their grip on power. This comprehensive approach to asserting absolute authority during times of crisis or civil unrest is a fundamental shift in the balance of power between the government and the people. The normal freedoms and protections that citizens have come to expect are put on hold, replaced by the government's unwavering control and the suspension of basic rights. The implications of such a drastic measure can be far-reaching and long-lasting, with the potential to profoundly impact the fabric of society itself. Individuals and communities must adapt to secure their well-being in the face of unpredictable challenges and potential crises. Agencies like the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, could significantly reduce personal freedoms and self-sufficiency, as their primary objective would be to maintain public order and ensure the safety of the masses. This centralized control could come at the expense of individual liberties and the ability to independently provide for one's own needs. In such a scenario, securing your own stockpile of essential supplies becomes a crucial strategy for survival and resilience. Concealing your resources through the creation of hidden rooms or secret compartments can help protect your access to necessities. When distribution is restricted and subjected to government oversight, this approach can provide a valuable safeguard against the possibility of having your hard-earned provisions confiscated or rationed by authorities. If you want to effectively protect your resources, you must adopt a strategic mindset. Anticipate potential challenges and proactively take steps to secure your essentials. By doing so, you'll have a better chance of maintaining your independence and overall well-being during times of crisis or instability. One potential solution is to consider building a subterranean bunker in your backyard. These hidden underground structures can discreetly store your supplies, shielding them from prying eyes. Constructing such a bunker doesn't have to be an exorbitantly expensive endeavor, and I can provide you with a detailed step-by-step guide if you're interested in pursuing this option. The key to successful supply concealment is to make it as challenging as possible for FEMA or other unwanted visitors to locate your stockpile. They will likely focus their search efforts on the most obvious places, such as the kitchen, pantry, or garage. However, if your supplies are cleverly hidden, they might just overlook them, especially if the authorities are operating in a hurried or chaotic environment. As an additional layer of protection, it is advisable to spread your storage locations out, rather than consolidating everything in a single place. This approach can help reduce the risk of your entire stockpile being discovered and potentially confiscated. By diversifying the locations where you store your essential items, you can increase the chances of maintaining access to at least a portion of your resources, even if some of your hiding spots are compromised. Remember, the goal is to take proactive measures to safeguard your ability to provide for yourself and your loved ones, even in the face of potential disruptions to the normal distribution of goods and services. By implementing strategic hiding techniques and diversifying your storage locations, you can enhance your resilience and increase your chances of weathering any crisis that may arise. Having a robust emergency preparedness plan is crucial in today's uncertain world, Diversifying your backup options is key to ensuring the security of your valuable supplies. By keeping your emergency stockpile distributed across multiple locations, you can deter potential threats and maintain your hidden reserves. This multi-layered approach to preparedness can provide an added layer of protection, making it more challenging for anyone to gain full access to your entire inventory. When selecting hiding spots for your supplies, consider less obvious places like attics, basements, or even secret compartments within your home. This can help conceal your essential preparations, from food and water to firearms and other valuables. By keeping a low profile and avoiding any public display of your prepper status, you can minimize the risk of becoming a target during a crisis. It's important to stay informed about your legal rights and the protocols governing emergency situations in your area. Understanding the circumstances under which authorities may have the right to access your supplies can help you navigate potential encounters with FEMA or law enforcement. Remain calm and cooperative, but be prepared to employ discreet measures to protect your resources without escalating the situation. Surrounding yourself with a small, trusted circle of associates can also play a crucial role in your overall preparedness strategy. This can help prevent unwanted attention and prevent you from becoming the go-to resource for your community, which could quickly deplete your carefully curated supplies. By maintaining a discreet and self-sufficient approach, you can increase your chances of weathering any crisis successfully. Remember, the key to effective emergency preparedness is a comprehensive and well-executed plan that prioritizes the security and protection of your vital resources. By diversifying your backup options, concealing your supplies, and cultivating a network of trusted individuals, you can enhance your resilience and increase your chances of weathering any crisis that may arise. In times of major emergencies, it's essential to be prepared and protect your household. When resources are scarce and their distribution needs to be controlled, it's crucial to keep your level of preparedness discreet. Avoid drawing unnecessary attention to your household, as this could make you a target during a crisis. One key aspect of preparedness is to hide some of your emergency supplies. This ensures that your household doesn't solely rely on potentially unreliable government assistance or become overly dependent on outside sources. It's not just about avoiding the risk of seizure. It's about maintaining a sense of self-reliance and resilience in the face of adversity. It's wise to build a small, trusted network of like-minded individuals who can support and assist one another during challenging times. By sharing knowledge, resources, and strategies, you can create a stronger safety net for your community. At the same time, it's important to resist the temptation to become the go-to resource for the entire community. Maintaining a certain level of discretion will help you and your trusted network weather the storm more effectively. Remember, true preparedness is not just about stockpiling supplies. It's about developing a multifaceted approach that includes self-reliance, community collaboration, and a commitment to protecting your household and your way of life, even in the face of major emergencies.
What's known as transplant tourism isn't just confined to Mexico. A recent report found that organ trafficking generates an estimated $1.7 billion a year globally. There's one country where this trade happens on an industrial scale. In China, it isn't run by traffickers, but by the state.
Disturbing news just out from London. A tribunal found that some of the victims of the forced organ harvesting are detainees from the Falun Gong movement. Former Falun Gong and Uyghur Muslim inmates report they were subjected to ongoing medical checkups and blood testing.
In 2019, an international tribunal accused China of executing tens of thousands of political prisoners and selling their organs on the black market between 2000 and 2005. The organs fed a demand from wealthy foreigners from across the globe.
South Korean police say they're investigating an organized crime group that sends patients to China for organ transplants. The Chinese regime banned organ transplant tourism in 2007, but the practice continues, with people willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to skip the long waiting list for organs in their own countries.
China claims it stopped harvesting prisoners' organs in 2015. But in 2019, the tribunal found that the constant supply of organs available in Chinese hospitals could only be coming from executions.
Makes you think of some grotesque restaurant where you go in and you pick your lobster in a tank. But these are human beings we're talking about.
Chinese surgeon Dr. Enver Tohti was a key whistleblower for the tribunal.
This photo is probably the only photo I can find as a surgeon. This is me.
Once a highly skilled surgeon, he now lives in political exile in London, earning a scant living as an Uber driver.
One day, my chief surgeon asked me, said, "Do you want to do something wild?" He said, "We are going to the execution ground." Oh, I was panicking. Why I'm going to the execution ground? Not only me, the nurse and my assistant, everybody was panicking. What are we going to do? Our job is to save people. Why we are going to go to the execution ground? You can see there are more than 10 people got shot already. And they were wearing prisoner's uniform. And the head was shaved, like mine. And the bullet comes through here and out from here. So this part is blown away. And they briefed me. Do as quick as possible, remove the liver and 2 kidneys. Then I thought he's alive. My chief surgeon was standing to my left. Said, "Okay, cut here, through that way, go quickly." Because that kind of operation, that things in China is illegal. It is encouraged by the state. We got brainwashed from this kindergarten. So if anybody got shot because he's executed, that means he's enemy of the state.
This is large-scale illegal organ harvesting. And the targets are Uyghurs, Tibetans, Falun Gong members. These are innocent people who are killed by the communist regime. It seems that Falun Gong members, especially, were targeted, had their organs harvested because they live these clean lifestyles with no smoking, no alcohol. We know that in 2006 alone, 11,000 tourists went to China to get an organ. The fact that in China, one can receive a kidney in a matter of hours points out to the fact that China is meeting this demand very probably by killing people. We're very likely witnessing a modern-day genocide, and the international community is not even able to grasp the extent of this possible genocide because there's a scarcity of information, because international bodies are afraid of China. So if China is not going to be accountable for their deeds, China will become even more powerful and more daring in just challenging the international law. China is like a bull that marches on the world, and destroys a life.